So it's been a while since I have posted, and I figured that I would come back with another political test. I haven't done one of these in a while. I think the last one I did was the Academic Agents Unpopular Academy test. This was back in maybe late December, early January of 2021. So it has indeed been quite a while. Now, this is actually, believe it or not, the second attempt at making this video. I originally made a video for the 8 values test, but for some reason the footage ended up not coming through all the way. I only got like 8 seconds of the footage, and I had to trudge through that. It was a very terrible test, very generic, and I figured, you know what? No, I'm not going to re-record this. This is too annoying. So I figured, very similar to how I did that fascist test, or the how fascist are you test. This was back in October of 2020, so almost 2 years ago. I figured, why not do the same thing with with communism? Now, I already get a sense of where I'm going to land, but I figured for shits and giggles, this could be a lot of fun. So yeah. Communism test, testing your degree of communist beliefs. Communism is a social and political ideology whose ultimate goal is the establishment of a communist society, which is defined as a socio-economic order based on the common ownership and absence of social classes, inequality, and private property. While communism encompasses several schools of thought, this test uses the classical Marxist. Okay, so yeah, it's a Marxian communist. So yeah, we'll just get started. We'll go through here. Let's see where I land. I wonder where it is. So anyway, the state should control all aspects of economic production. So not only do I not believe that the state should control all aspects of the mean, or not only do I believe that the state should not control all aspects of the means of production, but I don't think it should control any. So we are going to strongly disagree on that. So the state should ensure that all citizens have universal basic income decoupled from labor performance. So I actually believe in UBI, or negative income tax, to some degree, depending upon how it's implemented. So in this case, surprisingly, I'm not going to do completely agree, but I'm going to do agree, because I know people on the left want to implement UBI on top of basic welfare programs, which is kind of pointless. It's like you don't need one if you already have the other. So I don't know. I think I know he's not a communist, but I think I like Kyle Kulinski makes that brain dead argument for some reason. But all right, so class, quote unquote, is not a sufficiently homogeneous entity to form the basis of serious societal analysis. So I agree with this. Now, I do think class is more, I guess, deterministic in someone's socials, or as a sociological analysis within a particular society, as opposed to something like skin color, or so what we think of as race, so excluding the cultural aspects. But very similar to what I said in my video where I took the how fascist are you test, I mentioned that things like cultural lines are far more distinct in terms of dividing us and finding differences, as opposed to something like class, because let's say a wage worker in China does not have the same experience as a wage worker. I think I used as an example like a Colombian coffee farmer worker. They do not have fundamentally the same experience. Yeah, maybe they both have wage jobs in their respective societies, so they'd be on the same equivalent level, but their experiences are fundamentally different due to the environment that they grew up in, both physical and societal and cultural. And at the same time, they're just not comparable jobs, especially the experiences of a factory worker who's like a wage worker does not line up, or does not correlate to the experiences of somebody who tills the land and works the fields, plows the wheat for his farmer overlord. So yeah, class is most certainly not homogenous. Yeah, class is important in determining societal analysis depending on how you go about it, but it is not a sufficiently homogenous entity in order to form such a basis. So I agree. The worth of a commodity should be determined by the amount of labor required to produce it. Absolutely not. I'm not even going to try to debunk the labor theory of value here because it is fundamentally flawed. And I'm sure all those who are watching this channel know that the labor theory of value, while, I mean, an earnest early attempt to try to discern what quantifies as value or how you define or determine value, because again, we need to remember it's not just a fundamentally Marxist way of determining value. You also saw that with the classical economists, even going back to Adam Smith. He was the one who essentially wrote or put to paper the concept that would later become known as the labor theory of value. But yeah, no, we know that that is not true. We know that value is, well, it depends on if you subscribe to a more neoclassical philosophy or if you subscribe to a more Austrian. I tend to lean more Austrian, so I believe that value is subjective. I mean, at the end of the day, a very, 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 like let's say you have the best pastry chef in the world, and he does the same thing every day, and he puts the smallest bit of effort into making a fancy pastry. He does it all the time, so it takes practically no effort. Whereas you have you have like an amateur chef who tries to do the same thing. It takes trial and error, and it takes him way longer to make the same thing. It's obviously not going to be as good. But just because he spent way longer, does that mean that it has more inherent value? No. It's all about quality, and then also it's subjective too. So, absolutely disagree with that. However, I do understand where those early economists were coming from when they were trying to determine labor or value on the basis of labor. So, capitalism is a precondition for freedom to flourish. Absolutely, that is very true. And I'm not saying that from any sort of ideological perspective. I'm saying that from a purely analytical perspective. We need to remember that democracy is actually not a precondition for freedom to flourish. It's more so like icing on the cake. The two main prerequisites for a society to flourish and a society to be prosperous and potentially free are the rule of law and property rights, aka what Marx, or not even Marx necessarily, but a condition of capitalism itself. I don't even particularly care for the word capitalism, but yeah, no. So we also need to see that liberal dictatorships, quote unquote, or liberal societies, economically speaking, socially speaking, with no democratic institutions whatsoever, are still fundamentally more prosperous and free than illiberal dictatorships. So something like democratic socialism, think of like Venezuela, something like that. But yeah, so take a look at that. And then we also see how freedom is always downstream from private property rights. Take a look at, and even in like an authoritarian society, you can see that democratization will happen naturally if the society has private property rights. Just look at Chile, for instance. Yeah, you had Pinochet, who was a dictator, obviously, did some terrible things, but eventually he stepped down voluntarily. The society was moving in a specific direction due to the economic liberalization that made democracy, proper democracy, possible. We see that in Chile. We've seen that in many other situations throughout the duration of the 19th and the 20th century. And just some food for thought. Have you ever seen a communist or socialist country where something like gay rights was a thing? Absolutely not. You see, there is a correlation between individual liberties and individual freedom and capitalism. Again, just read The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek. It is absolutely evident. So yes, absolutely, capitalism is a precondition for freedom to flourish. So the absence of a free market economy will inevitably lead to the suppression of individual rights. So I'm not going to say inevitably, but most of the time that is the case. Again, so I'm not saying, you could argue whether it's correlation or causation. I can't think of necessarily any instances in which a country that transitions from capitalism to socialism leads to more rights being expanded. That goes back again to the previous question, or the previous statement. But I can't think of any instances in which that occurred. But at the same time, I can't necessarily think of any situations where it was the opposite. I mean, I'm sure there are some outlying scenarios. So I'm going to go with a hesitant neutral on this one. So slacking is a part of human nature and will only increase in societies where there is no promise of financial gain. I'd say so. I mean, I'd say without any sort of profit incentive, without the incentive to work and obtain material wealth. I mean, the only incentive to work in that case is survival. But again, the profit motive, even though it has led to some negative externalities, as many things do, it has also led to innovation. It has also led to increased productivity in a society. And we need to remember that work is also not just about making money. Work is also about giving your life a sense of purpose. It gives you something to do. I know from personal experience that when I don't work, I generally tend to gravitate towards, I guess, maybe not like the healthiest outlets, and I don't mean anything like bad or illegal or anything, but just things that maybe aren't necessarily conducive to my mental or physical health. Boredom breeds, I don't know, I'm not going to get into that, but I do have some funny stories. But either way, yes, slacking is part of human nature, and unless there's an incentive, whether that incentive is basic survival, which is always going to be the case, but you're never going to get beyond a certain point, hence there's not going to be any sort of material economic prosperity unless there is some kind of motive, something to motivate people to work, something that will ultimately end up leading to further economic growth. So I am going to say absolutely agree. Many members of the working class who vote right-wing live in a kind of false consciousness where they do not understand their own true interests. So yeah, you see, this is a very kind of elitist, very almost, oh, I know better than you kind of argument that you often see leftists use. Like, oh, they're just voting against their own interests. And then it also kind of has to do with how you define right and left, which is very arbitrary these days. But yeah, no, I just don't like this argument because people do come to okay, I will say there are people who are just completely blind and for purely cultural reasons or without doing research, they vote for like the right-wing candidate or the left-wing candidate without actually really even taking a look at specific policy prescriptions. But I mean, people have their own individual reasons for voting right-wing or left-wing. And then you also do have, if this is a matter of labor and interests that are benefiting, I don't know, people in the material sense, which I think this is the where the test is coming from specific, again, because we need to remember that socialism, communism is the most materialist ideology known to man. But yeah, no, people have different reasons for voting different things. And then you also do have right-wing or specifically right-wing populists who do care about things like organized labor and even like, yeah, so organized labor, unions, better social programs, that sort of thing. I mean, I think, so I was never particularly a big fan of Donald Trump, but Donald Trump in many ways was more to the left on some, or quote unquote left on some issues compared to Hillary Clinton, specifically regarding the market and even regulation. I know Trump cut a bunch of regulations, but I think actually maybe not regulation, but like social programs and trade and that sort of thing. And he was definitely more open to the idea of UBI than Hillary Clinton was, which is again kind of funny. So I would say again, this is just kind of an elitist, really out of touch way of looking at it. And again, you do see many leftists make this argument. It's really condescending. I mean, I'm not a working class right-wing voter, but I can see that this is just an absolutely condescending argument that you see made on the internet all the time. So the state should be responsible for providing all citizens with basic necessities, including food, housing, medical care, and education. Okay, it would be nice. It would be nice. But that is not the responsibility of the state per se. I mean, if the people in that country want that to be the case, sure, and they vote on it, okay, whatever, there. And if they have the means to do so on an economic level and a social level. But the three primary functions of the state, the fundamental functions, are courts to enforce property rights, or, I mean, maybe not in the case of a communist country, but courts, a court system, a legal system, judiciary, military, to defend against foreign invasions at the very least, and law enforcement, or some sort of system that upholds the rule of law. So yeah, but responsible implies that there is a moral prerogative to do so, and the government does not have that moral prerogative. That's sort of like the DLC aspect. This is all DLC content right here. I'd argue maybe education would be the exception. However, the key word here is provide. I don't think the government should provide education, or at least, it should offer it, but it should not administer it. It should ensure that everybody has equal access to these things, but it should not itself provide these things, these services. And that goes, I think, for all of these in this case. So I will go with disagree. Artists should have no private ownership over the works that they create. Okay, so here we get into intellectual property. And this is a big debate I've noticed, especially among libertarians. Like, what does it count as a legitimate form of property? Because then you go into like frivolous lawsuits, copyright infringement, copyright claims, especially you see that on YouTube all the time. I can't explain how many times I've had frivolous copyright claims that I've had to dispute, and I've outright told YouTube, no, this is frivolous, like fuck off. And I've won some of them, but then some of them, it's just these companies just keep insisting that it's theirs, and it's not even the original creators either. It's these corporations that claim to have ownership over these things, and even if the smaller person is not profiting off of it, and I don't profit off of this channel as of this video. They still don't give a crap. I mean, they're still going to strike it because they're assholes. However, at the same time, you still need, as a writer, as a creative person, as somebody who is currently working on a fiction book, a novel, or multiple actually, and have been for years, I wouldn't want my creation at the same time to kind of be out in the open for anybody to profit off of. But then again, so this is a very slippery slope. So it's one I need to research more, so I'm going to stay neutral on this particular one. People will not work hard in countries where they cannot get rich from their work. Absolutely, I agree. This goes back to the one I think it was like 2 or 3 questions ago. Where it talks about, again, the profit motive. So yeah, absolutely agree on this one. This is just a repetitive question. Okay, so the working classes across the world are more common with each other than the non-working classes of their own countries. So no, again, this was one of the earliest questions I ended up talking about. Again, the workers in the different cultures and countries, different contexts, they don't necessarily translate. The similarities are really only superficial at the end of the day. So, I guess they do have something in common, but really it's only skin deep. So I'm just going to go with a regular disagree right there. There should be no such thing as private ownership of land. So I think there are some solid arguments for Georgism, and that's not even inherently communistic. You see even Georgist libertarians who are like libertarian on every single other issue, so long as it comes to land. But even in that sense, it is just so that there is a way to provide taxation for a monarchist state. I think land should be able to be privately owned. It does lead to efficiency, and then you get into John Locke's concept of homesteading. Yeah, I think there are people who can misuse their land, and if that's a detriment to society as a whole, like if somebody has a monopoly on all the water and is like, that's leading the community to die or something, yeah, okay, then we can talk. But I think it's a case-by-case basis, but for the most part, absolutely, there should be private ownership of land. It just makes society better in general. There should be a 100% tax on all inheritance. This isn't even necessarily a communist argument. Again, I've seen you've even seen some classical liberals. Like I think of Jim Buchanan, the famous Nobel Prize winning economist. He made essentially that argument at one point. He believed that that should be the source of taxation in society. I forget which. I think it was an essay he wrote. It wasn't Calculus of Consent, which is his main book. But no, yeah. So that's not an inherently communist argument. I personally disagree with that. I think inheritance tax is just like kind of arbitrary. I mean, I'm open to discuss potential tax on inheritance if it means the reduction of other taxes that happen actually when you're alive and you're working, more immediate things. But yeah, no. For now, I'm gonna say disagree. But I'm willing to discuss finer details, but definitely not 100%. There should be no such thing as private ownership of business. Again, this sort of goes back to land, which is a kind of capital. Private ownership just makes things more efficient, and it also leads to more innovation. And I'm open to the idea of worker co-ops. Hey, I'm actually pro the idea so long as it's not government mandated, and then they can compete in a free market alongside private companies. They duel it out. We see what the ideal model is, and then maybe if private co-ops actually turn out to be feasible, maybe we'll see more of them arise, and that'll become the norm. Hey, I'm fine with that. I don't know if that's actually going to be the case, but I'm willing to see that happen. But private ownership of business is important. Yeah, you do get greedy, corrupt corporations, of course, but it's going to be so much worse if there are if companies are legally mandated to be run by the workers democratically, of all things. So I absolutely disagree with that. Poverty, disease, and early death are endemic to capitalism. Well, they're endemic to society in general, no matter what the economic model is. However, I mean, I think it's kind of funny that they say endemic to capitalism when all of these things happen under communism. I mean, you don't see bread lines in capitalist countries, do you? And this also goes back to, I've seen so many videos made by bread tubers or breadliners who have talked about, there's been way more deaths under capitalism as opposed to communism. And it's a very duplicitous argument because, yeah, by their metrics, that is the case. However, what they are doing is they're conflating the deaths that happen, quote unquote, under capitalism, and the arguments that they make aren't happening because of capitalism. It's just the result of capitalism or capitalist countries' democracy or whatever, capitalist or governments in a society that happen to be capitalist. Those deaths and those things are just the result of them not intervening. It's not a result of capitalism themselves. We need to remember, all capitalism is private. It's the continuous fluctuation and interaction of private individuals in a free market that is built upon the grounds of property rights. It's just a process. It's not even an ideology in the same way communism is. Whereas in communism, everything is meticulously planned, and the deaths that happen, a lot of the deaths and accidents aren't by nature. They're by design, whether by the result of intentional engineering or just negative byproducts. And then we get into the thing like the Holodomor. The Holodomor has not happened. Something like that has not happened within a capitalist country. Yeah, I mean, a genocide, sure, but nothing orchestrated like on that scale. Plus, like when breadliners make that argument, they're talking about like even poor countries in Africa, and it's like, can you even call that capitalism? Like for them, by their metric, anything that is not communist or anything that is not socialist is by default capitalist. So, endemic to capitalism, no. Endemic to society, yeah. So I'm just going to put disagree in that case right there. Regular disagree. Because, I mean, it still does happen. But, again, it's endemic to pretty much just life in general. So all credit and loans should be centralized in one national bank controlled by the state. No. And the Fed. All means of communication should be centralized in the hands of the state. No, that's just going to lead to further inefficiency. Again, yeah, you're going to get maybe monopolies that arise, telecommunication companies, and that has to go back to the argument for things like net neutrality, which I'm going to say is not communist, but it's definitely leans more towards the central planning, and it's not even going to do anything. Yeah. But we also need to remember that these monopolies, like telecommunication company monopolies, are the result of crony capitalism. And these monopolies are not natural. They are, monopoly rights are essentially lobbied for by representatives from these companies, which grant them to them. And so it eventually shuts out potential competitors from that market, from potentially creating an even better service or company. So that's also, in a sense, central control by the government, albeit by proxy. But no, it needs to be as decentralized as possible. So not in the hands of states or corporations. The individual's best interests are indistinguishable from society's best interests. You see, this is one of the most dangerous tenets of communism that I can imagine, especially because people are fundamentally, inherently unique as individuals. I mean that in the strictest sense. Everything from biology to emotionally, or biologically, emotionally, personality-wise, just in every single regard. And the best solution is to have a society or a system which takes all of those individual needs and all of those quirks, for the lack of a better term, into account when trying to meet everybody's interests and everybody's needs, a more individualist way of looking at things. Yeah, everybody in a society does have general needs in common, like food, water, medicine, just those very rudimentary things. But when you get into the specifics, that is most certainly not the case. And I think this is one of the worst assumptions of the communist ideology. So absolutely not. This is a very disgusting premise. The internal contradictions of capitalism are so great that the free market system will eventually collapse. I mean, it might. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't call necessarily what we have a free market. I also don't think the term collapse is necessarily. I mean, I don't know if it means in general, like worldwide and forever, that sort of thing, or if it means like referring to specific countries. But it's just more complicated than this. I mean, again, Marxism is essentially an eschatological, almost Calvinistic theory of history, just in terms of the inevitable progression of how the economy and how society will end up evolving and progressing, with communism being the end goal and utopia, that being the final static end. But even if communism were achievable, that would eventually collapse too. So will the market system eventually collapse? Yeah, maybe in some places over time. I mean, I think they'll eventually come back in some regard. I have no idea if capitalism is the final economic system. I'm sure that there's going to be something else in the future. I mean, civilization has had changing systems and paradigms all the way going back to its inception until now, and what we think of capitalism is only a very, very recent invention within the past 200 years. So yeah, I mean, I think everything's bound to collapse or at least evolve, but is it due to internal contradictions? I mean, maybe. When I think of, I don't know, like in a free market with completely no regulation or anything, like, yeah, corporations will take over. I know that's basically a meme, but there is still some truth to that. At least in terms of their power potentially overshadowing the state. I think it's, in most instances, it is more realistic that it'll eventually merge with the state, and I do think that's the direction that, unfortunately, our Western democratic capitalist societies are going in. So I'm going to disagree with it, but not to the full extent, but obviously I'm disagreeing with it for completely different reasons than a communist would. So religion clouds the judgment of the masses and prevents them from seeing reality clearly. Um, the irony of this is that communism is a religion. Fundamentally, yeah, God might not be the central tenet, but it has all of the eschatological assumptions of religion as well, specifically Protestantism. And I kind of like to say this tongue-in-cheek, but also realistically, I think Marx was the final Protestant reformer of the Reformation. He just didn't know it. But yeah, I mean, again, this is not only very reductive, and it just makes a blanket statement referring to all religion, and again, it also depends on how you define religion. Different people have defined it in different ways. Some might even argue that like Eastern religions aren't really quote-unquote religions, at least because they certainly aren't in the Western sense. But in general terms, yeah, religion, really any sort of spiritual or ideological belief system that has spiritual implications. However, in the sense of communism being a religion, spiritual is replaced by the material, but it still serves the same exact purpose. And so, according to Marx, religion is the opium of the masses, but hey, so is communism. But I know what they're trying to say here, so I'm going to disagree with that. Because, I mean, I do admit, sometimes religion, it has been used for bad in history. I can't honestly say that it has been 100% a force for good, even though I know and I believe that it has, for the most part, been a force for good and necessary for the evolution and even the emergence of human cultures to begin with. Like, no, there's never been a society that has emerged without a fundamental, intrinsic, underlying, deep-seated spiritual tradition. So, the state should ensure an even-handed distribution of the population across the nation's territory. Okay, so that's just like population control at that point, or rather dictating where people should live and shouldn't live. That just hinders free movement. The right to movement, the right to go anywhere. That's just totalitarian in general. I didn't even know that this was a fundamental presupposition of communism itself. I think this is like 1984 shit right here. And again, it hinders the right to free movement. And so that's actually, now that I think of it, it's kind of funny when you hear people on the right these days talking about, how the left, the socialists and communists want open borders. They want like free movement of people. I mean, if communists believe in this, that would completely negate that argument from the right, especially also given the fact that you can't have open borders and a communist welfare state at the same time. But absolutely not. I think this is a very disgusting premise, like many of the others that we have tackled already. So, a one-party system would get rid of a lot of the nonsense in politics and lead to better decisions overall. Better decisions? No. Quicker decisions? Absolutely. Again, one-party system, that's also a fundamental feature of fascism as well. And so it just goes to show that sometimes the lines are blurry between the two ideologies, especially when you get a place like China that in practice, or that in theory and ideologically speaking, is communist, like the ruling party is the CCP, but in practice is more or less fascist in how it interacts, especially with how it controls corporations by proxy. Yeah, because I've always said, as semi-jokingly, fascism is worse than communism because fascism actually works, and that is absolutely the case with China right now. So yeah, I would get rid of a lot of the nonsense, the procedural nonsense in politics. But will it lead to better decisions? No. You lost me at that point. The unequal power relations between business owners and workers are inherently exploitative. I mean, I think it depends on again, it's not taking individuals into account. Do you have exploitative companies, exploitative bosses? Absolutely you do. You absolutely do. But is that inherent? No, it's not inherent. And again, communism doesn't make any sort of differentiation between small mom and pop stores and large mega corporations. They see them as the same thing, and they see that all as exploitive. I mean, is Apple using cheap labor in China those companies, those people work there for like dimes on the hour, and throw themselves off of buildings, and they have to put nets there to catch them to make sure that they don't die so they can put them back to work. Is that inherently exploitive? Yes, it is. But is like, I don't know, the little antique shop down on the corner that run and owned by like an old married couple that employs like a 17-year-old high school girl who wants to work there and make some extra money, are they exploiting her? No. Inherently is the key word here. No. Absolutely disagree. So I am 10% communist, not a communist. And again, I think the reason for that 10% even is just because I disagreed with certain things on the basis of wording, and because I felt like I couldn't make an informed decision on certain issues. So I think that's really what accounts for it. But then again, also, I just want to clarify, my beliefs are fairly syncretic. I have some left-wing beliefs, I have some right-wing beliefs. It averages out. I don't even know where it averages out at this point, but I don't really see myself falling on the traditional political spectrum. Although I'm nominally classically liberal, I guess, even though people like Dave Rubin have ruined that term classical liberal for me. National liberal, maybe. I don't know, with traditionalist characteristics. But so anyway, so 10% not a communist. Your personal agreement with communism is low, indicating that you support few of communism's principles as presented in a classical Marxian literature. You most likely believe in the necessity of private property and private business, as well as the right to free economic association and individually controlled production. Absolutely. You most likely also believe that individuals are more motivated by the prospect of personal gain than by serving the needs of some amorphous social group, such as quote-unquote society, that the individual perhaps never asked to be a part of. Yes, I think that that's a fair assessment of what I believe. I am frankly not surprised. I just wanted to take this test because I know we did the fascism test at one point. Figured I'd do the opposite and take the communist test. But yeah, there we are. That's about it. I am doing a scripted video that hopefully I'll have out by the end of the week, or maybe next week. It depends on how this week goes, because I do have a lot of stuff to do by Friday. But yeah, I do have a scripted video on the way, and then hopefully another one before the end of the summer after that. But either way, on that note, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And be sure to tune in for further content.